Hi. Shall we begin with a bow? Welcome to Unit 9 now. We're making our way through our studies of life transitions. We've broken life transitions down into 3 phases and looked at the ways the rites of passage have mirrored those 3 stages, been developed with specific practices for each of those 3 phases. We've looked at the severance phase. We looked at the challenges of the severance phase as, on the one hand, the grieving of the loss of the old. Even if the old was something that was uncomfortable or painful, maybe it's the loss then of the hope of what the old phase of our lives would have been. Generally, there's ambivalence about it, so at least some degree of sense of loss in the severance phase. We also looked in the severance phase at the courage it takes to step forward into our lives, the courage to let go of the old, to let go of those old moorings or the old anchors, to let ourselves be carried out away from the familiar shore, and really to let ourselves let go of the familiar identities that were wrapped up in that old phase, the self-concepts, the self-images, possibly the relationships, possibly our relationship to our place, our places, the world we've been in, the world we've known. So a lot of courage it takes to move away from the familiar, the energy it takes to initiate the change sometimes. Sometimes the initiation comes from outside, but it takes energy for us to get on board with that change. And sometimes, when the force of stasis wants to keep us stuck in an old place, it takes the same kind of energy of strength and courage to initiate the change. That's the severance phase. And then we've looked at the threshold phase, the in-between time, the liminal phase, when we're no longer where we used to be, but not yet where we're going to be. Maybe it's a stage of emptiness that opens into space, spaciousness, possibility. Maybe it's a stage of darkness or depression, emptiness, that allows us to know a deep kind of intimacy with ourselves and with the world, a deep kind of power to be present. The agitation that was there in the old phase of life that we had begun to outgrow, the agitation that was there as we found that old life taken away from us, the agitation also quiets and stills in this threshold phase. So there's a lot to say about the threshold phase, and we looked at it through a couple different lenses, space and the quiet and stillness and peace, really, of our own inner nature. And we also looked at the relationship of this phase to contemplative practice, sharing some sense of liminality. Now it's time to step into the new phase. Reincorporation, return. We come out of the lodge and back into the village. We come down from the mountain, back into the village. Our boat brings us back to shore and back into the village. We're the same and we're different. The village is the same and it's different. So this reincorporation phase is the 3rd phase of life transitions, and various practices have been developed to help us move into this phase. I want to say that it's probable that we're not all in this phase. It's certain that we're not all in this phase. I hesitate a little bit to present some of the understandings of reincorporation, the return phase, for that very reason, that it might feel premature, or it might invite us to put a kind of a sort of a happy gloss over what's still cooking in us. I don't want to take that burner off the stove too quickly. If there's still more digesting of severance, of threshold that needs to be done, let's give it time. It's such a precious thing to do, to give ourselves the time that we need with our transitions. And yet, the river's rolling. The course is limited. We only have so many weeks this semester. So my hope is you can take in the material about reincorporation and return, ask your questions, digest it, reflect back on other experiences you have had of reincorporation, and let yourself be where you are right now. So we'll do our work with this, and it may be that you set it aside, this teaching about the third phase of transitions. You set it aside and come back to it at some later point when the timing is right. So I'm inviting a both-and view here. Consider this deeply and wait until the time is right. Let yourself be right where you are right now. So this first part of the reincorporation phase has to deal with the new dawn, with the joy and the delight and the sense of, yes, I did it. It's such an important part of a transition. It really does help us take in the changes that have happened for us, digest them more deeply, if we can allow ourselves to fully be with this joyful, new way of being in the world. I'll also say, and we've looked at this throughout the course, it shows up in different ways for different of us. And it shows up in different ways at different times. Sometimes it's just a bubbling over delight and just incredible aliveness and juice as we come back into the world, like all this life force has been released in us. Other times, this joy is much quieter, much softer, much more gentle. Maybe it's simply sitting back with a slight smile and a sense of contentment, looking at your world, taking in your familiar house and your friends and your place with new eyes in just a kind of a quiet, contented, easy way. So just be prepared to look and see, how does it show up for you? And let's let that be a broad spectrum of possibilities for how this phase and the particular allies of our inner nature will present themselves to us. So I'm glad you're here. I'm going to bow. I'm looking forward to our discussions this week. See you online.